We talk about the symbolism of the pentagram. A lot of people, at first people are thinking, well, you're trying to say that there's some deep, dark Satanism involved, which it can be that, but not necessarily. A lot of it is interwoven in what they call the ancient mysteries, or the wisdom tradition. That's another term that they use in these groups. And so the whole idea of the pentagram, for example, was based on the rotation of Venus around the sun, and how Venus over an 8-year cycle goes around the sun and forms a 5-pointed star. That's where they took the idea from. Now in Washington, D.C., you have, because people point out and we explain all this in the film, in Washington, D.C., you have a pentagram in the street design of Washington, D.C., but people say, well, wait a minute, it's an incomplete pentagram, because the last part of it comes down and it stops short. And so they say, well, that means it's not really a pentagram. And what we show is that the idea of a broken pentagram is actually a pagan symbol, well known. We quote Manly P. Hall and other sources. And then we show that the reason for it is because this rotation of Venus around the sun stops short at the end of its cycle. And so it does not form a complete pentagram. And so the ancients, that's why they use the open or broken pentagram. So those kind of details, but once you understand it that way, and you understand that this was, the Pythagoreans, they thought the pentagram, they called it the pentangle or the pentalpha. They thought it was very symbolic, and they had all these philosophic traditions that they developed from it. But that's what paganism and the occult really is. The word occult simply means that which is hidden. And when we read the New Testament and we read what the Apostle Paul is saying, he's saying to the church at one point, I tell you that the sacrifice which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. Well, who are these demons? Zeus, Apollo, yep. Athena. We've been conditioned, I think, in modern times to think these are just harmless,
just fake names.
Yeah.
I mean, no, there's real beings behind these names.
Yeah. In fact, the temple of Zeus in the ancient world, in Revelation, where Jesus says, I know where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is. Mm-hmm. He's talking to the church at Pergamum. Mm-hmm. That's where they had the temple of Zeus. And that's believed to have been the seat of Satan at that time. In fact, the image, now this gets really powerful, Mondo. I want to share this, because this is where Freemasonry and the Jesuits and all these secret groups, they all practice what are called the ancient mystery religion, which is the idea that really blending all the gods and goddesses into one, once you understand it. But the way they do it is, you read Albert Pike in his book Morals and Dogma, and he mentions the ancient Egyptian god Ammon of Mendes. And Ammon was this ram-headed or goat-headed god. And it was, Pike says, that the secret of Ammon is that he was the spirit of the gods, and that all the other gods were various representations of him. So what they did was, you had the Greeks, they took their god Zeus, and they said, well, Ammon, he must be the soul or the spirit of Zeus. So they took the ram horns from Ammon and they put them on the bearded figure of Zeus, and you end up with this bearded guy with horns coming out of his head. In fact, you can look up online, if you look up Zeus Ammon, you'll find bearded figures with horns coming out of their head. Alexander the Great believed he was the son of Zeus Ammon. That's why you have a coin of Alexander with a ram's horn coming out of his head. So that's where this whole idea, but see, the early church recognized that this was Satanism. This was Satan's religion, this blending together of all the gods. So we believe it's very important to understand what these groups are doing, because people are not just waking up, Mondo, and suddenly they're promoting transgenderism and open borders and all these different things. These things are being talked about by people who are involved in these groups, and then they're unleashing them into our system.
Everything you just said is so interesting, in that it's almost like all these things that have been there and that they've been secret, some of them, it seems now, are just right out in the open in our current, like I don't know, the last 5-10 years, all those ancient gods. It seems to be that even though they've kind of been in the shadows now, when you look at all the trans stuff, that the gender confusion, the wokeness, social justice, all these other things, these subversive things that have been happening for a long time, are now just becoming mainstream in our current culture.
Well, relating it to the Bible, we both know the history of what happened in the days of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, that they both worship Baal. The scripture says that when Ahab worshiped Baal, it says as though it were a light thing that he would worship Baal. And so that's what King Ahab does. But how did they get there? I believe the way that they got there was it began with these secret groups. They're practicing this paganism in hideaway places, and then eventually it manifests itself in the government, and that becomes like the new normal.
Yeah, the new normal. That's a good way to say it.
And that's exactly what Ahab and Jezebel did. They made Baal worship the new normal. They started persecuting the true prophets of God, and then now it's the prophets of Baal who are sitting at Jezebel's table.
Yeah. And then we see the big battle in 1 Kings 18 with Elijah. I mean, here we are.